This is the sixth session of looking at the value chain in agriculture and looking at what are the critical pressure points in driving our efficiency and our competitiveness. Now, food security in South Africa from a national perspective is actually in a pretty good space. We're a net exporter of agricultural products. The competitiveness of most of our value chains, probably 2/3, is really good because we can compete on the global market. There's a demand for our products, but to remain competitive, we need to cut costs and we need to use technology to drive our efficiencies. Now, one area that we need to also look at closely is obviously logistics. Now, the estimate is that roughly 30% of the cost of food can be attributed to logistics. In other words, logistics is a critical role in the whole value chain, in the cost structure of the value chain, and where we can try to drive efficiencies. So today we have a great panel of experts that are going to discuss some of the issues in the value chain in the agro-food system, to see where we can improve. How do we drive efficiencies? What plans are we making to remain ahead of the curve globally in terms of competition? Because we must create greater market access. We must, once we're also competitive, we are producing food at what we call export parity, then that ensures affordable, safe and nutritious food for South Africans and actually for the region. So I want to introduce the participants. We have Andrew Waller, CEO of Grindrod. We have Philippus Oosthuizen from Continual, a logistics company. We have Gavin Kelly from the Road Freight Association, and we have Christo Boyens from Senvest Market Access Trade Vantage. So welcome to each one of you. We are looking forward to your expertise in terms of the different aspects to logistics in the agro-food system. And Andrew, I want to start with you. You're a world-class freight logistics operation. You have operations in more than 20 countries. You're listed on the JSE. You got a pretty good bird's eye view or broad perspective on logistics globally. How does South Africa's logistics compare with global logistics? Are we efficient, sufficiently efficient, and are we right up there, or what should we be working on?
Morning, John. Thanks for having me, and thank you for that flattering introduction. We're a little logistics company, part of a very big supply chain, as you know, starting at the customer and ending, starting at the producer and ending at the customer, or either way around. And you know, our stats are a little bit different to yours. We think that the logistics cost is indeed higher than 30%, and maybe over the liquids and the minerals, it is a little bit higher. And we also, depending on how you look at it, the shipping element of the logistics chain also seems to be quite a high portion of what we move around the world. If you ask the Institute of Chartered Shippers, they say that 90% of the world's freight moves on the sea. So your question is very direct. How does South Africa compare? The answer is, if South Africa doesn't compare, it won't be used. Because at the end of the day, the world is competing for the customer. So we have to understand, and it's not just South Africa, we like to look at it as Southern Africa. Southern Africa's products need to get to the customers. And if we don't get them there at the right price, they'll get it somewhere else. It's as simple as that. We are very blessed to have good resources, both in the agri space and the mineral space. We're blessed to have some very good infrastructure. And we just need to make sure the supply chain operates efficiently to get the product to the customer. And that's, I think, where we need to focus more and more of our effort.
Right. Thanks, Andy. I'm going to come back to you because we also want to explore the COVID situation, but I'm going to just sort of give everybody first a chance. Philippus, you have been in bulk logistics and supply chain industry for more than 20 years. Tell us about your experience in the road freight transport and the challenges that the industry faces. We also know that you're busy with some innovative work in making the road freight space more efficient. Can you expand, please?
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Yeah, John, I think over the past 20 years, we've seen the physical logistics landscape change dramatically. From a traditional rail infrastructure to a more diverse road component over the last few years. I think that's been challenging us for probably the last 10 years. I think we can see a lot of the activities is uncoordinated. The challenge of rising costs is definitely contributing to the challenge. And what we've done and looked at was to say, how do we split the two? How do we take physical logistics, put them in a box, and then how can we save on those costs? Because I think we really do have excellent experts in the transport environment and the physical logistics environment. And we started working on a model where we identify the information and work with that to see how can we save in optimizing information and then relating it back to the physical logistics environment.
Right, thanks, Philippus. Gavin, we've known each other for some time, and Gavin's from the Road Freight Association. Just also to tie up on the road freight, driving up and down the N1 or the N3, it's just amazing the number of lorries on the road, and road freight has actually ballooned in South Africa, obviously at the expense of rail freight, etc. What are the 3 critical risk areas that you see in the road freight space that we work in? And perhaps you can even expand on the high cube container issue that we're still trying to solve with government. Where do we stand with that? Because I think we have a number of risks in the road freight situation. Risks around road safety, legal compliance, even hijackings and arson, riots along the roads. Perhaps you can expand a bit on where the big risks are in the road freight space.
Well, John, I think you've raised all the risks. You've done my address for me. Do you want that to be general risk or in terms of COVID-19? What are you looking at?
Let's first focus on general risks, and then I want to get to COVID-19. I first want to set the sort of the baseline.
All right. You will know that transport was deregulated in the mid-1980s. So the move to road transport in preference to rail has happened over the last 45 to almost 50 years. It's a tendency that's followed a lot of practices around the world where it's really been around efficiencies. And if you look at the way transport has changed, and I'm not making a case for road, I'm just trying to draw a picture, because I'm sure 20 years down the line, it might move away from road to something else, drones or whatever. But we've seen that change over the last 40 odd years. And with that, it has brought a number of interesting challenges. The first thing really is security of load. As goods have moved to road and those goods have become high value goods, and high value goods doesn't necessarily mean televisions. The number one hijacked commodity on the roads for the last couple of years, the last 5 years, hasn't been TVs or whiskey, and I'm not going to mention which type of walking whiskey either. It's been maize, it's been food, it's been cooking oil. Why? Well, for 2 reasons. Number one is you can, sell that product very easily. You don't need special conditions with which to sell it. And secondly, it comes pre-packed quite often. So it's in manageable sizes. So the first problem we have really is around the criminal element in taking cargo, either hijacking it. In the last year, that whole modus operandi has changed. They now hit the depots. They don't worry about hitting single trucks on the road. So that's a big problem, is theft. The second problem is the huge challenges we find in terms of bureaucracy. So trying to run your business, and you mentioned high cubes, and that's in that whole bureaucracy. So as technology changes around the world, and remember, we often are reactive to what's happening in the world. So the new trucks we get, we don't build them here. They are designed, maybe not assembled overseas. A number of them are. They come here, and we then react to that technology. So when things happen around the world, like high cubes, we are part of that chain. We didn't instigate the high cube. We didn't build the high cube. And John, I don't know if you know, there's a bigger container coming. So if we can't sort out high cube, which is really 30 centimeters higher than the standard box. We now got a 13.6 meter box that's entered into the shipping lanes. So we really have this problem in terms of dealing with bureaucracy. And it's not only that, it's the way we train drivers, it's the way we check for roadworthiness. So we have an industry that really is required to self-regulate, and that's fine. But the building blocks that we require from government to ensure that that playing field is leveled are not there. So we struggle with bureaucratic type things. And then we struggle with being able to get the general government structures to understand that private sector and transport is driven by the client, not driven by he or she who provides the mode to, let me use that term because they use the term mode, the mode to move cargo. It's the client, and the client chooses a mode based on how they're going to make money, whether we like that or not. So why is 85% of cargo on trucks? Because at this stage, you can track your load. You know it's going to take 10 hours to get from Durban to Johannesburg. I'm just using a generalization. And you can have smaller loads and mitigate your cost of transport. Until something else comes along, road is going to be the be-all. So those are three of the challenges we have. The final challenge we have really is around the professionalism. How do you keep and they're called the rats and mice. How do you keep the cowboys, the rats and mice, out of this profession to ensure that the standard and the safety of this type of operation is maintained at a reasonable standard? So that's it in broad, the three areas.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gavin, for that perspective. Chris, I want to come to you now on the grain business. You've got to see that grain and oilseeds get from the storage to the client, and you in that transaction business, and you use both road freight and rail freight, and even in shipping. I really like to get your perspective on the trends that have been developing and where you see the efficiency gains are to be made. We also know that there's been this big move away from rail to road, and we're trying to turn it around back from road to rail because we believe there might be efficiencies. Do you think that's a viable option? So it's a bit of a broad perspective. I'm asking for you, where are we going with freight in general in the grains industry?
John, thank you very much. I think the gentleman before me already said what's been said. I think the change has been in the favor of road transport, and very specifics. If you talk about the rail, it's the cheapest form of transport. I just checked quickly to go from the middle or the central parts of South Africa to Paarl, for instance. The road transport cost with a single load would be something like 950 Rand, while rail would be something like 500 Rands. So the question is, why on earth are you not using rail? And the answer is we are trying our best to use rail. Unfortunately, the unpredictability and people not taking responsibility for that specific industry forces you to use road transport. Road transport, I think a lot of improvements have been done over time on fleets, specific fleets. I think something like fuel consumption, tire consumption, everything like that over time. And all of that has been under tight control. And I think on that side, the road is still, they are efficient, very efficient. Coming to the physical loading and offloading of the grain, I think that's where a big improvements can take place. I think it's not uncommon to see a truck standing between the 2 points, anything 6 to 8 hours, which is very inefficient. And I think if work needs to be done, it needs to be done on that specific aspect. Coming back to the rail, we tried our best in the last 4 years to get co-responsibility from the rail system. But you never get to a point where TFR would take responsibility if a rail truck doesn't arrive, if it doesn't arrive in time. lost in transit quantities. That's when trucks stand on a rail for a long time. You see a lot of lost in transit volume being taken, mostly stolen on the rail tracks. When you encounter a problem on a specific rail route, nobody will try to solve the problem. It's only the guy that uses the rail system that can try to solve the problem. So I think and then we know in many cases where rail infrastructure has been stolen, nobody repairs it. So that at this point, as we are speaking, it's basically the Senwes silos to Berlin, Escort, Daljosevat, Worcester, that's functional. Anything on exports, and we are talking about maize exports now, anything north of Bethlehem, there's no infrastructure there. So yeah, we are sitting with a big problem in terms of recovering from road to rail. And there are so many reasons why we should do it. Firstly, cost, and secondly, the infrastructure that's busy to collapse the roads and so on. So yeah, it's very important to get those right.
Thanks, Christo. We must perhaps also just chat about the effect of the big interlinks on the roads in the Free State. I mean, those roads and Northwest, we have to cart the grain from. Those roads were never built to manage these so-called 30-ton interlinks, and we see that the maintenance of these roads is a problem, and that also brings in a cost. Your perspective on that?
I think, John, it's accurate, the statement that you are making. The roads are busy collapsing due to heavy traffic. I think from a company's perspective, Senwes is we've got a full-time employee that liaise with municipalities and local government to repair the roads. And I can say we are fairly successful in that. Unfortunately, you cannot get involved in the provincial roads, which is also deteriorating. But we are fairly successful in managing the road infrastructure surrounding the silos. I think one thing that is a problem is patience. It's not only the Senwes infrastructure that's been used, it's also the farmers that uses those roads. And in many cases, the farmers would take the thing in own hands and try to fix the road themselves. But if you are patient enough, and Senwes puts in a lot of effort to repair those roads surrounding the silos and the towns, the smaller towns where we are. But unfortunately, we can't get involved in the provincial roads, which is going through the same hammering at this point in time.
Thank you, Christo. Earl Peters has just joined us, and Earl, thank you very much for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think I must unmute. Where do I get to?
Okay, Earl, thanks very much for joining us. I'm going to get to you now just while you settle, but I want to get back to Andrew. Andrew, obviously the ports we've seen now with COVID-19 are critically important, and we saw that when we dropped the capacity of the ports to roughly 30-35% with the initial lockdown, it created quite a lot of chaos, if I may say so. It's critically, and it was one of the focus areas of everybody in the economy, was to get the ports going again. Perhaps you can just give us a sense, or let me just first say, we realized how critically important the ports are to our economy, both in and out. And obviously from South African agricultural point of view and the value chain point of view, the exports, and we've been right in the middle of our export seasons in terms of table grapes, in terms of our pome and fruits, and now the citrus is getting up to its high point. So it's an absolutely critical medium for us. Perhaps you can give us a perspective on the functioning of the ports at this stage and how you see it from the private sector side.
Thanks, John. Yeah, quite right. When you shut down a port, you're shutting down a 2-month supply chain. And when you take that decision within a week, you've got months of product already ordered, months of product already on the water. So you're certainly interrupting something fairly fundamental to society. And if you go back to my first answer, where the Shipping Association talks about 80 or 90% of the world's freight moving on sea, it's a fairly significant number. So yes, it was a dramatic close. And then to suggest that only essential cargo could be brought into the port was also a bit of a challenge, because of course the ships weren't loaded as essential cargo only, and you've got a whole lot of containers with non-essential cargo. So to get through that whole process of now making sure you've got the essential cargo that goes to where it needs to go, and the non-essential cargo sits in a container at the port, well, of course, you then start getting congestion. We have a number of facilities around all the ports in South Africa, and all of those facilities are supposed to be used for empty containers. And on the return leg, coming back from the customers and going back to the producers to get full. At the moment, those facilities are almost 100% full of full containers, waiting, and obviously non-essential, and waiting for the rest of the business to be open in order that those containers can get to business. And of course, the business on the other side knows that as soon as that container arrives, they're going to be invoiced and have to pay for it. So there's that aspect of it as well that comes into it. Transnet are working now at 50% capacity, and indeed are actually with 50% of their workforce, because the ports are so empty, they are actually able to work at more than 50% capability. So we're finding that there is a churn of container ships in and out of the ports at the moment. Yes, we are experiencing problems where there's a bit of a COVID incident, then we have to close the facility for a while, do the deep clean and come back. But you're absolutely right. This is a 2-month supply chain that got interrupted within a week, and it's not going to take a week to get back to full operation. It's going to take a wee while to get back to full efficiency.
Thanks, Andy. Earl, I want to get to you now. While we're on the ports, we've obviously been in contact with the port authorities, especially now trying to get the citrus out. Cape Town certainly has its challenges with the 4 to 5 cases that have been identified positively over the weekend. There was a shutdown in Cape Town for a while, and we've also seen that the attendance or coming to work is a problem. There's a concern from the labor, and we sort of understand that. How do we deal with these challenges with labor in the ports at the moment? I think there's common understanding that labor is probably one of the biggest risks in the ports at the moment. So Earl, over to you.
Okay, yes. No, thank you, Christian. Thanks, Andy, for the comments. I think if I can take just a step back, and I'll wrap up quickly with regard to when we started out under the full lockdown at level 5. Obviously, we started out at 50% across our container terminals. I also want to touch on and assume that the focus is largely on the container terminals and not so much on the balance of the facilities that we operate as well. If I do exclude any of the facilities where there are interest, please feel free just to share it with me, bring it to my attention, and to seek just feedback on those facilities as well, because I might omit to provide feedback on that, because I want to keep the focus on the container terminals for now. With regards to the lockdown, we started at 50. We subsequently transitioned all the way through to once the lockdown was eased to level 4. Where we are today, essentially, if I were to call it 14 May, we're at 78% of our full capability operationally. At our urban container terminals, we're sitting at a higher level there. That's close to the 80%, I would say, given the resource complement that we require and the number of berths for the necessary service. And that's our Pier 1 container terminal and our urban container terminal. We were largely impacted at our Kuga container terminal in the Eastern Cape, and also our PECT container terminal as well. So those two facilities started out with one berth and with 2 gangs each. The P-container terminal essentially still continuing operating a one berth operation with 2 gangs. Ordinarily, they would operate 3. In terms of its, the 2 berths with 3 gangs. NCT, we ordinarily work 3 berths and we work 7 gangs. So where we are today is that we are working 2 berths and we're working 4 gangs across these 2 to try and ramp it up. Cape Town, we started out at 1. Cape Town was essentially followed our urban container terminals to ramp up to 2 berths working 4 and intermittently 5 gangs on the water side. That is what we've seen. Just what we got with COVID, the climate and also the impact, I think our greatest challenge was around the resourcing, also around in terms of how do we provide and create assurance with the employees. There's a lot of nervousness, a lot of anxiousness with the employees in terms of the COVID, in particular trying to avoid them becoming infected. To a large degree, we've provided assurance around that the measures that we've placed at work is unlike that you will be infected at work, given what we've employed there. You most probably more than likely that you most probably might pick it up going to the shop or another external environment. And that is really where we've also done a lot of education with our employees as well. The measures that applies at work must be applied at home as well. In home environment, once you leave the facility, you leave work. And I think in general, it's the same theme across many industries as well. We do a lot as organizations, corporate citizens, to try and look after our employees and to ensure that we put all the necessary prevention measures in place. That being said, it is new. There is a lot of pushback, and what we have found is that unfortunately our Cape Town facility, and with Cape Town becoming the epicenter of the COVID position in South Africa, we have now found that it's spilled over into the workforce. So Cape Town has the highest number of COVID cases. We currently have 10 cases there. And unfortunately, it spiked over a period, and it's not like 1 or 2. It spiked in one period, in a period of 1 day, where we had 4 people that tested positive. That unfortunately, immediately created, if you want to call it, panic with the employees. And we had to find ways around that in terms of what it is that we could do in order for them to return to work. If the case is what they were not sure was that, it is just a drawn-out process by trying to negotiate with the employees if they do feel unsafe. So our objective at that stage is, as much as we've lost some time, it was more looking in terms of how do we create continuity with the employees and how we will deal should we have more positive cases, because the reality is there will be more. And we can't be in a position to suspend operations all the time the moment we see someone has tested positive. So measures have been shaped as well, how we will treat it. Those that are tested positive, obviously we follow the normal isolation methods. Those trace and track, they will also be quarantined as well. So that we put in place with the employees. And at this point in time, touch wood, it looks like it's adequate for them in terms of the measures that we've put in place now to try and ramp up with regard to the situation in Cape Town. It is, I can't say that it is stable. I think that it is more in terms of the events that will take place after we've done the fumigation during the past weekend that will stabilize the environment. With regards to Cape Town, just in terms of the resourcing, because we know that Cape Town, and particularly the Eastern Cape as well in Durban, these are the facilities that largely where the export fruit will come through. We've now managed, instead of having 2 gangs throughout the 24-hour period, we've managed to get 2 shifts to return to 4 gangs, working 4 gangs instead of 2 gangs. And we are waiting results, obviously those that was tested or was quarantined based on contact, and see what those results are going to be. And that we more than likely will receive today or tomorrow. And that essentially means that we'll be back at 4 gangs at Cape Town. On the backdrop of all of that, With level 3 looming on the 1st of June, we do understand there's a requirement and expectation that transit would ramp up to 100%. Now, 100% in the short term for a tweak period for Transnet would, unfortunately, it's not a practical process for us to ramp up to 100% of our full staff complement. And for the simple reason, we have a large contingent that is deemed as compromised employees. In our case, it's about 30% of our workforce is impacted. So from a people stream point of view, we are looking at measures of bringing on board full-time contractors in the interim, because I don't think any organization can double the workforce to try and mitigate the COVID infections. However, we've started now in terms of identifying the resources within the organization that we can train quickly to onboard and get the gaps covered across the container terminals. Cape Town being the priority at this point in time, and that will then be followed by NCT. PNCT at this point is fairly stable. Our largest challenge, and I'm sharing a lot of detail, our largest challenge is really on the operator side and working our ship-to-shore cranes, and that is the piece of equipment that work across the vessel. And those are the ones that we're focusing on to keep a fair supply of resources to ramp up the number of gangs. So we are putting plans together now, how it is that we can get to the 7 gangs in the short term. From where we are today is that we see most probably that more than look like it's a 5 to 6 week period to get everyone back up to get to a full complement of 100%. So it's not going to be the immediate. Let's see if there's anything else that I missed. So there was a comment made around the depots and essential cargoes when we started up. Absolutely correct. Part and parcel is that from a transit point of view, transit does not have the ability to store all of the import cargo coming in. Transit has taken a decision, even though it was indicated at that stage that we could only handle essential cargo to offload. Transit has taken a decision with the support from the Port Authority, and obviously we've lobbied with respective government agencies that we be allowed to discharge an entire vessel. All import cargo can come in, because to nitpick containers on 4,000 a vessel of 4,000 containers for arguments are coming in. It's just impractical for us to work or load it back onto a ship. So there was agreement that essential cargo comes off for goods come off in containers, and then those that are deemed non-essential could leave the terminal, but would then go to an intended destination at that stage, and that was depots at that stage. So you're right, it did impact the empties. But we've largely left that with the lines. Because transit, obviously, we can't extend that deep into the supply chain to try and mitigate and find solutions for the supply chain. But we are working closely with respective shipping lines that has identified some other facilities with SARS. And from my understanding is that SARS has been fairly flexible to assist with opening other facilities for them to store cargoes. Both obviously with level 3 coming up on the 1st of June, we will most probably find that there will be more of the sectors that will be opening and will permitted to operate, and that we can start, or at least that the depots will be able to start clearing those full boxes. We have indicated to the respective ministries the impact that the direct and indirect consequence of the current regulations on the port system, because invariably we want to get the essential cargo in and out of the country, and it will impact the ports if that particular node is not resolved. So there's not an outright solution. We've also asked the various industries also to lobby on their side as well with respective ministries, as we can influence, but obviously we can't get the sway right, except that we've highlighted the risks to the supply chain. So that I would also add with asked shipping lines and other associations is that you continue the discussions also with respective ministries. You equally have a great influence with respective agencies. With regards to the preparation for the season, from an infrastructure point of view, we are ready to handle the current anticipated exports that will be coming through the ports, and that is on the reefer side for the citrus season. So we have sufficient plugs. We've looked, and a lot of focus has gone in around how do we manage the landside component of exports into our respective terminals as well. That we've done with the lines, we've done it with our terminals. We've touched base with some of the exporters to try and see how do we keep it fluid. There is one challenge I know that has recently been raised, is that unfortunately, not unfortunately, but probably to smooth the ingress to our respective terminals, we have to switch on booking systems to avoid that we have a convergence that is uncontrollable towards the port, because we can't have the congregation, in particular those arteries running into the terminals. But with the booking system, what we found is that dry containers obviously book as with reefer containers. What we've now done is that we've created more booking slots for reefers as we're in the reefer season now, to prioritize those particular containers to come in. Our gap is still between the cold stores or the packing and arriving at the port and looking for a booking once it is packed. So we're looking at measures, and I think we're close to resolving that. Whether it's on a booking reference or one of those measures, which we will share either today or tomorrow, to try and ensure that the feed into the terminal is more one of that is seamless running in. I think that is really what I wanted to share. But other than that, the environment is stable. The realities that we are dealing with is that two things is that we want to keep our employees and the concerns that they have, address them as quickly as we can, because that is where we're finding obviously where the deviations is coming in, disruptions to operations as well. We are dealing with people, and yeah, it's not always quite easy dealing with them, in particular from a labor point of view, where it is deemed as unsafe working conditions. So we've made lots of reference to, we provided PPE now, and if we maintain strict protocols around the prevention measures, we don't see why there would be any reason that we would probably see a great increase of the cases in our terminals.
Right.
That's my feedback for now.
Thanks very much, Earl. We really appreciate that detailed feedback, and we understand the anxiety that the Labour might have around this. We just hope that enough test kits are also available to test them, so that will bring certainty for them too in this time of uncertainty and anxiety. I just want to touch on one of the important points that you made, is the liaison with industry associations, for example, citrus growers. Obviously, I get a daily report too from them, and that anything that we must lobby with government ministries, you must please get through to us as soon as possible. We do have access. They are open to us to get that information to them and to take certain decisions at top level. So please do not stop liaising with us on what is necessary to make the ports as functional as possible. But really, thank you for that input. It's very worthwhile. It's good to see you making a lot of plans. Really appreciate that input. Philippus, I want to get back to you on the road side, on the road freight side. And you guys are busy with some pretty innovative work in terms of improving the competitiveness of your company in terms of other competitors in driving or getting grain to the ports or to the mills, etc. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the innovation behind this and what the cost drivers or the cost savers are in this process?
You know, looking at the various value chains and supply chains, that there's definitely this opportunity to combine these flows on an independent level objectively. We've seen that although we've got good competitors and a lot of good suppliers, that a lot of these activities are uncoordinated. And that arises the need that although we might have a good supply chain, agri value chain, but how does that compete next to the other value chains that's in opposite directions? And that's what we worked on over the last 4 years, is to try and identify those scenarios and case studies where we could combine these various flows. Now, obviously, there's opportunity within agri value chain to do that, not just on the bulk side, but also on the break bulk side. But we've seen that a lot of value gets unlocked across industries, not just within a specific environment. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I want to ask you a follow-up on that question. When you say coordinated across different companies, does that bring you into conflict with competition issues and competition law, or how do you get around that?
Yeah, John, I think that's a good question. Obviously, what we've done is to obviously position the business as independent as possible. Our main focus is to reduce cost and not to regulate cost or inflate cost. So we declare these savings as a benefit towards the product owners. And I think if you look at the total package, you definitely look at the, all the stakeholders in the value chain, that it's about improving efficiencies. Limiting empty legs, focusing on where we can affect standing times and so forth. I think we found that obviously most of our processing entities within South Africa was mainly built to accommodate rail, and there's a lot of congestion at those specific points. And we almost see that over the last few years that our road freight industry has almost become a component of the storage facility, in transit storage, which I think is unfortunate, and it's cost.
Thank you very much, Philippus. Appreciate that. Gavin, I want to just get back to you. The whole issue, and you mentioned it, the bureaucracy problems that we have, and interaction with government and Department of Transport. Are we getting the right traction with the Department of Transport to modernize our legal framework, if I can call it that, the legislation that we have around transport, to make it more efficient? How do you feel is the interaction between industry and the Department of Transport?
John, we found that over the last, 25 ministers of transport, over the last set of ministers of transport, the reaction to interaction has become worse and worse and worse. I mean, right now, I've personally met the current Minister of Transport 4 times, and that was during the truck burning issues, and it started off to be a very promising relationship. He listened to what we had to say. He was intent on making sure we met a lot more, and since then, it's dried up. We have changed track. We work with the provinces. We have far better relations with the MECs, because the MECs, in actual fact, are the kingpins in terms of how freight and how operations is done in terms of the National Road Traffic Act. So the Minister of Transport really is somebody who we write letters to, who we've tried to engage with, but he's somebody on the periphery. We find very, very little sensical return from the National Department of Transport. And a very good example of that is AUTO. They try to revive the AUTO task teams next week amidst all of what's happening right now, and wanted to have a meeting on Tuesday, but no documents were circulated. And I found that not only are we struggling, we've got some other partners with us, and I'm not going to mention their names, who have had to go and hijack him at events where they get told where he is, to have some sort of discussion with him. So the bureaucracy is a tremendously difficult thing to deal with. The legislation we work with is also gives us cause for concern, because a province can decide to do one thing and the 8 others not to do that, or change the way in which they implement. So it's a tremendous problem when you want to start bringing in new technology, whatever that technology might be. We're faced right now with artificial intelligence coming in, which is a big driver around the world. Types of engines. We've been discussing clean fuels for the last 10 years. We were supposed to have clean fuels on the table in 2015. It's now 2020. We know we're closer in terms of any of that. So the critical things that could change the cost of logistics, the way in which we operate efficiently or not, are just really not being attended to. We find that the Department of Transport, in the greater sense of the word, is very much a reactive type of department.
Perhaps just another question related to that. You have a pretty good bird's eye view of the whole industry in road freight. Is there sufficient competition in the road freight industry in terms of talk agriculture. I mean, you get so much specialized road freight, but in agriculture, your sense, is there sufficient competition to drive efficiencies?
John, yeah, I think there is sufficient competition. I think there are a couple of things that are legislated that stymie a bit of the competition. Things are allowed that allow operators who've got a little bit more financial muscle to squeeze some guys out in terms of what's out there. But I think the competition is there. Once again, I've just got a jet going past, so I'm just going to keep quiet for a while. Not sure if that's the missile the Department of Transport sending to me. Again, the strength in our diverse type of legislation for transport lies with the MECs. So and we've had some successes with the MECs. So for example, where we've seen an industry like the abnormal load very much or tied up because they can only operate certain times, we've been able to get those restrictions lifted in certain instances, which has allowed the smaller players to come in and play. So there is enough competition. I think we are not allowed to operate as freely as we should. There's a lot of this. We've got lots of regulation. We don't need more. If they just implemented that regulation, I'm going to go back to one that is critical for us. In legal terms, it's called fitness of vehicles. We all call it roadworthiness. If they just applied that and don't worry about fining people, take the unroadworthy vehicles off the road. That is what's done everywhere else in the world, and you can come back and play when your vehicle has passed a fitness test, a roadworthy test. If they just did that, we would deal with 50% of the problems we have on the roads. We can't even do that.
That's worrying, and we need to get those relationships, and we need to get that through to government too. Thanks very much, Gavin. Andy, I want us to get, and all of us actually, a bit more into the crystal ball and post-COVID, and what are the opportunities going to be? How is the environment going to be changed in terms of trade, in terms of logistics? I'm sure you've been doing some strategizing and looking into the crystal ball and repositioning your business. How do you see the opportunities panning out going forward?
Yeah, John, there's obviously a long way to go before we get to post-COVID, and to echo Earl's concern, I think we've put in place, if you take citrus alone, and numerous measures to ensure we are up to speed and can handle all the refrigeration, and the containers are all available and being brought into the country by Maersk and MSC and the like. So there's a lot of work that's been done. But the concern which Earl voiced, and I think we need to understand it very clearly, is that we're going to be operating with 20% of our staff at any one time not available to work. And that's an opportunity for those people who don't have work to come on board to assist, but it is going to increase the price of our logistics. We're going to be paying for a workforce and then having contractors. And we've already seen it in our depots, and Transnet, as Earl has pointed out, it is going to be a worry for us. Post-COVID, and we've already seen quite a lot of that unfolding. We're already seeing America, and they were doing it before, and we're seeing Japan now, starting to understand that they don't really want to be dependent on one specific geography. That's from the demand side. The supply side, we've got to ensure that we are able to supply at a competitive price. It's as simple as that. And that, as you said right at the outset, includes the logistics chain. We've got wonderful facilities, infrastructure, which we need to get working, rail, port, road, etc. And we've got wonderful resources in that. Some of the agri land that we have is really good. And if you go further up into Africa, it's even more so. So we've got to make sure that we are understanding where the customer is moving to and make sure that we get that supply chain closed. Whether that means Japan want to do a bit more of their own work, or South America is now going to be the manufacturing for North America, or whatever it is, we need to quickly adjust to that. So I think, and again, one of your panelists said it, the fluidity of what's going to happen, we need to be ready for. So, and we as South Africans are really good at that. Our agility and ability to move and make a plan has always seen that we've managed to come through and understand where the market's shifting to. So a lot of that, we've already spent a lot of time on that planning. We obviously expect a short-term drop in the markets, and that's all around confidence. But we also see, judging by the past, that confidence does come back and it builds back quite quickly. So we don't anticipate long, delayed underperformance. As soon as we get the resolution to the virus and are able to put whatever vaccine into us is necessary, I think you'll see that quite quick response back to full production. It will just be slightly different supply chains, as I say.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good to hear at least all the plans being made and understanding the environment, etc. This is going to be critical. We're going to go into a pretty new environment, and we've got to adapt to all these new patterns and trends that are developing. I want to get back to Christo. I want to get to you. You mentioned something just now that you said there are still significant inefficiencies at the offloading or the loading and offloading points, and that might even imply greater investments in equipment, etc., etc. Are businesses, both from the shipping side and from the client side, are they prepared to make those investments to drive those efficiencies?
John, thank you again. Yeah, there are certainly inefficiencies still at the loading and the offloading points. I think it's more logistic inefficiency than it's operational inefficiency. I think there needs to be done a lot more planning and a much better execution. As I said previously, a truck today doing a short distance may stand up to 6 hours per day at the loading point and the offloading point combined. So certainly there should be a more efficient way to utilize logistics. And then the question, and that's where Philippus and his team come in. I think backloads, right now, most of the logistic aim to do 1 or 2 or 3 loads per day from a silo to a processor. And perhaps that's not the correct approach. Perhaps one should rather do one longer trip, do a backload with it, and so on. So I think it's much more logistic, a better planning, a better execution of that specific plan. And I think, and on the rail side, if you can ensure reliability on the rail side and you accountability on the rail side, it will change a lot. At this point, when you use rail transport, you are sitting with what you have. You don't know what you're going to get. You might plan for loads to a longer distance, and you might hear there's import or exports is now a priority, or so I think just by sitting around and getting the right approach from the rail side, you can change a lot. I have to say the account managers at TFR are doing an excellent job. They do what they need to do, but the moment you get stuck with whatever problem it is on the rail side, there's nobody taking responsibility to solve it. Even them don't have the influence, call it the influence, to get operational people to execute and even higher up. So yeah, just by taking responsibility from the Spoornet side or Transnet TFR side, and take accountability, if they commit to something, deliver on that, will change a lot. But I think, as without repeating myself, on the road logistics side, there's a lot to be done by not focusing on the obvious stuff. As I said earlier, the efficiencies in the logistic companies are there. They invested a lot in tire management, in fuel management, in overtime. It's more now to focus on something by not turning the truck 3 times a day because you are stuck with a 6-hour offloading time. Rather go for something which is a longer distance in a completely different direction if needed, to be able to do 1 load a day at a decent income, and perhaps focus on that.
Christo, I want to get back to the road to rail concept, and it's one of the Job Summit outcomes, and one that we're dealing with directly with the president. And there's a question mark whether this is really going to be feasible in the long term, because there's going to be a lot of investment in infrastructure, in grain trucks, in locomotives. The branch lines have to be maintained. We know that getting to the malls, it's the municipalities that are responsible for the rail tracks and everything. And in some cases, they've been stolen. Do you think it's viable to get back to rail in a big measure, and to what level? I think it's less than 20% that's transported by rail now. Do you think we can get back to 50% or 60%?
I think, John, it's all a question of predictability. Being in a trading environment where you commit to certain deliveries at a certain point in time, you need the reliability of that mode of transport. So that's the thing that happened before any investment, anything, a commitment and responsibility from the TFR side to do what they say and to execute on what they say. And unfortunately, the experience up to this point in time is that you can't rely on it. It's I'm not going to give you examples, but I have many examples where what you just mentioned, I mean, infrastructure from the siding to the mill, which is supposed to be the municipality's responsibility. Nobody takes responsibility for that. And when you go into negotiations between municipality and TFR with that, there's no clear, there's actually nobody taking responsibility for that. So I think you have to ensure execution, and you have to ensure reliability before you can do any form. Without that, you have to find some different ways to do the business. Because once you commit to a contract, you have to execute on that specific contract.
John, can I come in here?
Yes, you're welcome. Anybody welcome to come in at any time.
John, our experience at Grindrod is slightly different. We are dependent on Transnet Freight Rail to move a lot of minerals to both Maputo and Richards Bay. At Maputo, we've managed to move the products through the port from the 4 million ton capacity per annum to a now record 20 million tons. Probably 80%, 90% of that comes on a Transnet wagon and with Transnet locomotives. And sure, you have to get it from the 4 to the 20. And you're not going to get it for 4 to 20 sitting in your office. You have to get to the Transnet people that are working. You've got to work with them to lock in train sets, and you've got to make it work, all of you. And we've managed to find a way of doing that very successfully with the people in Transnet through joint operations committees and the like. And we've been very successful both on the Maputo leg and the Richards Bay leg. We're also involved in the north-south corridor with the copper coming from the DRC, and there we've been a little bit less successful. We've got the Congo Rail Authority, SNCC, we've got Zambia, Zimbabwe, ourselves, and Transnet. So we've got 5 countries and their rail authorities as well as ourselves to coordinate, and that's quite a challenge. But we are not giving up. And with this new team at Transnet, we've had good interactions with Paul Darby and Caesar Mzimela, who are CEO of the group and of rail respectively. And already we can see a shifting in the energy there. And it does require us to take on board and roll up our sleeves to get involved to make it work. I'm not saying that Christo is not. I know he has. I've felt some of the pain that he's been through. But I think with the new team in Transnet, it's a good opportunity for us to now lift the level again and participate in this whole process. They're very open to working together, so we should apportion responsibility appropriately, and off we go. I think talking about Christo's earlier comments on road versus rail, I think the most important thing is rail works with bulk and volume and predictability. The flexibility of a truck, you're never going to beat. So I think volume and bulk and predictability is what we've got to ensure we can provide, which will then help Christos of the world in making sure that they can plan wherever it is at the loading or offloading bay. And that's the trick, is to get these locked train sets. And if you're starting to go over other people's or where other people use the railway line. And in South Africa, we've got the challenge with PRASA, with the passenger rail. They have rights over the same railway line. That is a challenge. And those are the things that we've got to just work through piece by piece.
Thanks very much, Andy. Gavin, you want to come in?
Yeah, I would like to come in, and the first thing I'm going to say, everyone says, oh, here comes the road boy, so here it comes. The first thing I want to do is agree with Andrew. Around for the last decade, there's been this term called road to rail, which is a myth. It can't be forced. And Andrew has hit the nail on the head. We have got members in the Road Freight Association who offer rail legs. They are logistics suppliers. They're not necessarily just road transport boys, and I'm going to use that term loosely. So what drives this? And this is what government's not getting. Who drives this? It's the customer, the client who drives this. And the client couldn't care whether you use the Starship Enterprise to transport something from one place to another, or a truck, or a train, or a boat, or a duck. The client wants it to get there, wants it all to get there, wants it to get there unbroken, wants to be able to get it there on a scheduled basis, whether that's once a day, once a week, once a month, once a millennium, whatever the case may be. And there's a security. Now, as soon as rail can do that, it can prove to the clients, not to the truckers, to the clients, and I think that's what Andrew's been saying, is that yes, we can move this for you. Price is the last, not the last thing. But if I charge you R5, but I can't guarantee it's going to get there, then I'm going to pay R1,000 because it's tracked and I know exactly where it is. One of the things with trucking, not all of them, but one of the things is you can go into XYZ portal and you can follow your box, with a truck. You can even see when it disappears, the hijackers have got it now. So that's what it's about. And that's what we need to focus on. And that's what we've been saying to government, is that this is a partnership. And if you want rail to work, we've got to put in place the things that rail needs to work. Then we can start getting cargo to move. And cargo will move driven by the client. That's all I want to say. I agree with you, Andrew. Agree with you.
I think we have 300 trucks crossing the border into Mozambique yesterday. And remember, the mines are only at 50%. We can have up to 1,000 trucks a day going into Maputo port. Now, 1,000 trucks a day is not efficient, is not effective, and believe me, the truckers don't love it either. It's not the way to transport. We've got kilometers, 20 kilometers of line at the border with the Congo of trucks. The truckers sit there for 4 days. They don't want to sit there for 4 days. If we can put it all onto rail, it's a much better solution. With the amount of product that we move in South Africa, if the volume's there, the train works. Just got to, as I said before, I feel for Christo. Our teams have got to work together with Transnet, and as I say, hopefully with Porsche at the helm now, we'll get a bit more traction. Certainly, we've had it in the past, but we're looking for more traction to make sure that we can get these branch lines. And that, as you said before, Christo, that's the system that we used to work in the old days. Yes, there's a lot more freight around, and for sure there'll be more coming in the future, but we've got to get that system working so that we can use the rail as it's supposed to be.
Thanks, Andy. Anybody want to comment? Earl, I want you to actually.
Sorry, I just want to Andrew there. What we've seen in the past is where you have 1 point to 1 point rail works like it should be. The problem on the grain side is you work on more than 470 silos that you have to, and there are certain lines you can take the Kroonstad line, for instance, which goes to Escort, or you can take whichever line that goes to Dalhuisafat, or any of those. At the moment, you have to load at different silos at different places and kind of collect at the Kroonstad hub, for instance. You have to collect. The rail system doesn't work anymore, and it's like people are losing track. At the moment you deliver the product to the end user, and the empty trucks need to come back. It's like it's not managed at all. So people would, we had a situation where we are sitting at Worcester, for instance, and the train leaves. There are 25 trucks there, but the train leaves with only 17. They leave the other. So it seems as if you use a point to point, that rail is very, very efficient, and you can actually manage and improve your business and the volumes as well. But the moment you're working with a fractured approach where you have to collect stuff, get it together, and then only take it to the point, that's where there is not sufficient management on that. So yeah, I agree. Where you use 1 point or 1 point, certainly there's performance there.
Earl, I think you're still on the line here. I just want to get your perspective also. You've given us a lot of feedback on the ports, which we absolutely sincerely appreciate. But the rail into the ports, are you well equipped to manage it from that point of view? And I'm talking, we're going to have quite a lot of maize exports. I think even deep sea exports on maize this year. Because there's a pretty big crop, I think our second biggest crop ever, but we're also going to be importing quite a bit of wheat still. So the rail in and out of the ports, is that still working pretty well?
Yeah, John, just from our perspective, it is working pretty well. I think just at this particular point in view is that I think it's just a bit of an imbalance in terms of what's coming in and what we're exporting. It was slow in terms of what was leaving the country initially. But given the rail side, particular running into the ports, we've not scaled down there. I think we're more better placed to actually to ramp that up. And I think it was to Gavin's point, is that our customers want to use it on Andrew as well. As it's, road serves its purpose, but particularly when you move large volumes, rail is the better solution to work with. So we are geared up to handle cargo on the rail side, and that's at the container terminals and at our non-container terminals, if you want to call it as well. And we prefer the solution if we can, understand about the efficiencies can drop us from time to time.
Okay, thanks, Earl. Right, I think we can start wrapping up. I think we covered the subject pretty well, but I want to give you all an opportunity for closing comments and perhaps touch on anything that you feel that we've missed, that we need to touch on. And Andy, I'm going to start with you. If you could wrap up from your side, please.
Yeah, John, I think it's a very interesting time for us to all be operating in. I think there's an opportunity for us to relook at a whole lot of parts of our supply chain and to connect again with the people in the supply chain. So this forum where I've now met Earl for the first time helps us to now grow a linkage with Transnet, a further linkage with us and Transnet. And we've had various conversations on the citrus in the past. I think all of those things are critical for us to understand that as Southern Africa, we compete against other parts of the world for our customer. And we need to make sure that, the road trucker or the rail guy or the farmer is not going to be able to earn his living if we can't compete with South America or Europe's citrus season. And that, as a country and as parts of the supply chain, we have to get close, understand what that is, and really go for it. I think post-COVID, I'm not as pessimistic as all the economists I read. I understand after the world's wars that took 5 or 6 years, that it took many years to come back to full scale. This has been 2 or 3 or 4 months. I think we'll come back better and stronger as the confidence of the people come back in the world around us. And
thanks very much. Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. Really appreciate it. Philippus, I want to get to you. Some closing comments from your side.
John, yes, I think from there's a lot being said today. I definitely think the conditions permits that various role players come together. We need to get the road trucks where they need to be and be efficient. We need to consolidate where needed. We need to use our rail infrastructure. I think there's a lot of infrastructure available that's unutilized. We definitely need to evaluate this on an independent level and engage with the various role players. I think there's a lot of value to be unlocked in our value chains, and especially with synergies between different value chains or supply chains. And I do see that being the focus area. I think post-COVID, there will definitely be a big focus on technology for people to digitalize their logistics processes. That's definitely going to happen. We can already see that, and we've experienced that in the question of 7 weeks, that suddenly big, nice offices has actually become redundant to do your business with. So we're going to see those things playing off over the next few weeks, years, and so forth. But yeah, I think there's opportunity. Just getting back to the rail discussion, I do think that a lot of the growth we've seen in rail might have been to the expense of the agri value chain, maybe a little bit. I think that's something that I know that all players in the industry has engaged with the rail guys for extensively via obviously Agri as well. But I do see that if we can find a synergy there between the state-owned entities and the private sector in terms of transport solutionists, that we can definitely create that hub and spoke models and make it work where it needs to be.
Great, thanks, Philippus. Earl, I want to get to you for some closing comments.
Yes, thanks, John, and thank you for the invite, and it's a great session, and I hope we can continue with this. Just from my side, and to echo what Andrew's mentioned as well, as I've been with Transnet now for 26 years, and what I've seen is that ordinarily relationships is really at arm's length. I only deal with who my customer is, and what I've come to learn now in this time now is that we've actually flattened the relationships with the shipping lines customers or carriers. Is actually the interface has happened more frequently now at the cargo interest on the vessels. It's given greater visibility for ourselves, and it's also given us a sense to understand, in particular, the priorities and importance within the markets and the supply chains. So this is definitely a great forum, and I think it's something, if we can do more of this, I think we'll most probably, Sandra said, let's keep the supply chains efficient so that we can compete with those other sources of supply.
Absolutely, Earl. I think we need more talking, and I think the crisis has actually brought us closer together, exactly as you've said, to understand what the role of everyone is in pretty complicated, complex supply chains that we have today. But those also make us competitive, and we must maintain that competitiveness. It's an absolute critical area for our country. I want to get to Gavin. Closing comments from your side, Gavin?
Thanks, John. I think everything has been said. I'm just going to replow that field. Definitely, business as we know it is going to change. In the RFA, I can save a good 140,000 Rand by not having a head office and closing down the regional offices. Everyone's been working, they've been. So business as we know it definitely is going to change. I think the most important point, again, raised by Andrew, and sometimes this is what we're missing, is that we're part of a cog in terms of Southern Africa. We stand to lose that gateway to Africa at the rate we're going and what's happening. We've got to up our game there, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm saying us as a country. And I definitely think that we're not going to take 40, 50 years to reconstruct. It'll probably take us, at the outset, we've done a bit of a survey with our members. How long would it take them to get back to full capacity? Probably 4 months at the most. It depends on supply and demand. That's what it's going to be.
All right, thanks, Gavin. Christo, I'm going to give you the last word. Closing comments from your side.
Thank you, John. I think the last 7 weeks showed that logistics is really a key focus point between the production side and the customer side. It also showed that we have to perform better, even better from our side, being in the staple industry. We see that the growth in demand and people's reliance on the staple food, and of course the ability to get the production from the producing area to the processor. You mentioned about the big crop coming up. You can just imagine if logistics fail in this instance, how big the problem will be. We've seen that in the meat industry in the US, where there are simply failures. What I also think is we are going to be challenged in the days to come as logistics companies and businesses by the infrastructure collapse. We are talking about Eskom, we are talking about the roads, we are talking about the theft of infrastructure. So we have to find a solution for that to keep the wheels rolling. If we are in an essential industry, and I think just by saying that, we know that there's a big future for us in agriculture and in the logistics business. Thanks, John.
Right, thanks very much. Philippus, anything from your side?
No, I think that's it. I'm probably the youngest of the crowd this morning, so I do appreciate everyone's input, and thank you for the opportunity. I think there's a lot of hard work ahead. I think we need to leverage the drive on technology. The hype about the fourth industrial solution over the past few years is definitely gonna get momentum now. And I think if we apply that between the various companies and product owners and stakeholders, there's definitely going to be an opportunity to optimize and unlock good savings out of the supply chains.
Thanks very much. I listened to an incredibly interesting, it's an 8 minutes blog, but it's on our newsletter today. So please go and listen to it. It's by world-renowned agribusiness expert, Professor Marcos Fava-Neves. He teaches all over the world, and he basically says that in the last month or so, we've probably seen a decade of transformation through digitalization, through a whole lot of things. And he mentioned 10 factors. Go and listen to that, because that is how the world has changed. It's transformed within the question of the last month or two. And the reality is we've got to adapt as quickly as possible and drive the efficiency as quickly as possible too. So thank you very much to each one of you for your contributions. I found this most enlightening and certainly useful, and we will continue the conversation. So thank you very much, and have a good day.
John, can I just, before you, all of you go away, thank you very much, John, Andrew, Gavin, Philippus, Christo, and Earl. Certainly, as in the other sessions, this was most enlightening and interesting, and it informs us. I think the whole issue behind all these sessions that we've had is to sort of open up the window to each other's worlds in the different value chains. So if you go and listen to each of these sessions, the picture just opens up for you, and you create, and there's a creation of understanding of each other's worlds. I think for me, John, the question is, why do we need as value chains to work together and be functional? It's exactly for the reason that we need to make South Africa work. Yeah. The better we facilitate jobs and businesses in South Africa, the better for both our exchange rate, but also for the big problems we have, the joblessness, the big diversion between income streams, which you have alluded to today. Those are the things that we understand that makes our country work. And each one of you, I think that's the sort of the lasting thing. You do the job that you do, but the things that really make you feel valuable is these bigger picture things. If you contribute to something that has a lasting impression or a value unlocking in our world, and then that is the sort of the common denominator I heard of from all of you today. So thank you, John. Thank you for facilitating it and preparing yourself for it. And each of you guys, good luck and Godspeed with your business. Thank you for your time. It was really valuable.